When people think of Paul McCartney, they usually see the smiling Beatle, the voice behind Hey Jude, the eternal optimist who symbolized peace, love, and melody for an entire generation. Yet behind that gentle image lived a man far more complex, emotional, guarded, and quietly wounded by betrayals that followed him for decades. For years, fans believed the Beatles' greatest battles were creative clashes over music, fame, or money. But few realized Paul carried deeper scars tied to specific people who shattered his trust and altered the course of his life and career. At the center of it all was John Lennon, his closest friend and greatest collaborator, with whom he wrote over 200 songs and reshaped modern music. Yet by the mid-1960s their bond began to fracture as John grew resentful of Paul's discipline and leadership while Paul struggled with John's chaos, rebellion, and Yoko Ono's constant presence. After manager Brian Epstein's death, the band spiraled. Paul fought to hold them together, John wanted freedom, studio sessions became battlegrounds, and when Paul sued to dissolve the band, John saw it as the ultimate betrayal, responding with the venomous "How do you sleep?" While Paul answered quietly through too many people, their feud playing out through music instead of words. Until tragedy ended any chance of reconciliation when John was murdered in 1980, leaving Paul haunted by things left unsaid. Another wound came from Michael Jackson, once a genuine friend in the early 1980s, whom Paul treated like a younger brother and advised about the power of owning music catalogs, never imagining that Michael would later buy ATV Music and with it most of the Beatles' publishing, a move that felt to Paul like a personal betrayal disguised as business, a pain that never truly faded despite time and success. Then there was Mark David Chapman, the man who didn't just kill John Lennon but, in Paul's words, stole a piece of the Beatles' soul, leaving McCartney devastated, misunderstood by the public for a shocked, offhand comment, and forever aware that the four of them would never stand together again. Inside the band, tension with George Harrison added another layer of heartbreak, as Paul's perfectionism and controlling tendencies left George feeling humiliated and creatively stifled, culminating in walkouts, lingering resentment, and a quiet divide that never fully healed even after the breakup. Outside the studio, Yoko Ono became another source of bitterness, not for loving John, but for changing the very chemistry of the Beatles, reshaping decisions, challenging Paul's authority, and later clashing with him over legacy, songwriting credits, and public remarks that cut deeply, turning cooperation into a fragile, polite truce rather than true trust. The business world delivered perhaps the most destructive blow through Alan Klein, the manager Paul never trusted, who took control after Epstein's death while John, George, and Ringo sided against Paul, forcing him into the role of villain when he sued to escape Klein's grip, only for history to later prove Paul right when Klein was exposed for fraud, though by then the Beatles were already gone. Even legends like Frank Sinatra left their mark, dismissing rock music, mocking yesterday, and reducing the Beatles' artistry to noisy rebellion, a quiet but painful clash between generations that Paul never forgot. Finally, producer Phil Spector became a symbol of creative violation when his bombastic wall of sound buried Paul's intimate vision for the long and winding road, ignoring McCartney's protests and turning the final Beatles album into proof that the band no longer shared a single vision, a wrong Paul would only right decades later with Let It Be. Naked. Yet despite all of this, Paul McCartney has rarely spoken openly about resentment or hatred, not out of fear, but wisdom, understanding that one angry quote could shatter the myth of the Beatles and the image of the smiling Beatle the world clings to. Instead of public feuds, he let the music speak, choosing grace over grudges, silence over scandal, and love over bitterness, carrying his lessons quietly as he continued to sing, create, and remind the world that even after betrayal, loss, and heartbreak, love, in the end, outlasts everything.